like most people, I picked Terence Crawford to win this fight. But I did not expect him to win inside 4 rounds. That did surprise me. There's no doubt about it. I actually thought that this fight would probably go the distance. And if Terence Crawford did get a stoppage, it would be very late on. The fact he was able to dispatch of Kell Brook as quickly as he did, just 4 rounds, does that speak to Kell Brook being washed up, or to Terence Crawford just being absolutely exceptional? I mean, we all knew he was good anyway, but maybe I underestimated just how good Terence Crawford is. I've obviously been watching him for years, but in some of Terence Crawford's recent fights, you know, he got staggered. There was a knockdown which didn't get called and so on and so forth. And I thought, going in there against a guy as experienced as Brook, as big as Kell Brook, surely this is going to be a competitive fight until the late rounds. And maybe Crawford's, extra skill level, his better upper body movement, his versatility, his speed, that'll take over in the later rounds. But it didn't get there. Kell Brook did pretty well in the first 2 rounds. In fact, 2 of the 3 judges gave Kell Brook 2 of the first 3 rounds. So Brook was actually ahead on 2 of the judges' scorecards going into the 4th. But after the first round, I think the second round was debatable. That could have gone either way. But from the second round, you could tell that Kell Brook was already starting to get uncomfortable with Terence Crawford's angles and his speed. And one thing that surprised me is Brook's size and his power never really showed up in this fight. And I know some people are going to say, well, that's because Kell Brook can't make 147 and still be strong like he used to. Maybe that's true. Because I expected whatever shots Kell Brook did land, and he was landing good jabs in this fight. Okay, in the first couple rounds, he landed some good jabs. But nothing had any impact on Terence Crawford. And Kell Brook has a normally very powerful jab that can hurt people and bust them up. He did manage to graze Terence Crawford's right eye, I think it was. He had some graze on there or bruise above his right eye. And I'm going to assume that was from a punch. I don't know if it was a headbutt or whatever. But as I say, his punches didn't have any impact on Terence Crawford at all. And therefore, Crawford didn't really have any respect, or let me not say no respect, but he certainly wasn't particularly concerned about what Brook was throwing back at him. I guess he felt like he had Brook timed, he had the distance and the angles all figured out. Brook did let some right hands go, but they fell short. He wasn't able to get that right hand on the target. So that speaks to Terence Crawford's movement, upper body movement, foot movement, timing, staying just out of distance. And then when Brook makes his move, Terence Crawford can make a defensive move and come back with a shot. And he just looked very confident, and it looked inevitable to me after the second round. Even though you could give Brook that second round, Crawford was just getting into the right positions. Brook was maintaining fairly good distance, but he's always been more rigid than someone like Terence Crawford, who's a much more fluid fighter. And that was quite apparent, in those first 2 rounds, especially the second round. The stark contrast between the upright and rigid Brook and the fluid and versatile Terence Crawford. So, yeah, in the third round, you saw Crawford starting to really have some success. Then in the fourth round, Crawford landed what can only be described as a right jab come hook from a southpaw stance. And it sent Kell Brook reeling into the ropes, almost head first. And the referee gave him a count because I guess he ruled that the ropes prevented him from going down. The fight resumed. Terence Crawford went in for the finish, hit Kell Brook with a few more shots, and the ref waved it off. I have seen some people, as is usually the case with fights that get stopped without any knockdowns, I have seen some people say that the stoppage was premature, particularly given the fact that Kell Brook was ahead after, after 3 rounds, he was ahead. Some people are saying the stoppage was premature. Well, as far as I'm aware, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, Kell Brook hasn't complained about the stoppage. So as much as you might say it was a little premature, if the fighter himself doesn't complain, what does that tell you? That tells you that he didn't think he could last any longer, and therefore the referee jumping in was the right decision. In the majority of cases, that's what it tells you. So I don't have any issue with the stoppage. Yeah, it wasn't, maybe he could have let it go on a little bit longer, but Kell Brook is a fighter who's taken a fair amount of punishment in his career. Remember that first Carson Jones fight? Took plenty of punishment there. Obviously, the Gennady Golovkin and Errol Spence fights. So, I don't see any reason why the referee would have let it go on longer than he did. So I've got no issue with the stoppage. I'm just really surprised that the fight was over so quickly. Who'd have thought that Amir Khan, who can't take the kind of punch that Kell Brook can take, who'd have thought that Amir Khan would have lasted longer than Kell Brook against Terence Crawford? See, that definitely surprised me. Again, to reiterate, yeah, I thought Terence Crawford would win, but I thought this would be a competitive fight and it would go long. But, maybe I did underestimate how far gone Kell Brook was, because this is what most people are telling me now. This morning, they're saying, you know what happened? It's just that Kell Brook is washed. Because I asked the question on Patreon. I said, is it that Terence Crawford is just that incredibly good, or that Kell Brook is washed? And most of them are saying, yeah, Terence Crawford's incredibly good, but Kell Brook's washed, bro. He's never been the same since the Gennady Golovkin and Errol Spence fights. Those fights just finished him off. And since then, he hasn't been a top level fighter anymore. And maybe they're right based upon this performance, because Terence Crawford taking him out in 4 rounds. No one's ever done anything like that to Kell Brook or even come close. Even Gennady Golovkin wasn't able to stop Kell Brook that quick. In fact, how far did I forget how long the Gennady Golovkin fight went. Was it 5 rounds? I think it was 5 rounds, wasn't it? Was it 4 rounds? Hang on, was it 3? I can't even remember how long the Brook Golovkin fight was. But either way, that was at middleweight. At welterweight, no one's ever done anything remotely like that to Kell Brook. And that brings us on to Mr. Errol Spence. Because the pressure on Terence Crawford in this fight was to outdo Errol Spence, his main rival at the moment anyway, 147 pounds. And boy, did he step up to the plate and, managed to complete that task. Yeah, he did a much better job on Kell Brook than Errol Spence did. And of course, again, people are going to say this is not the same version of Brook who Errol Spence fought, and I'm sure they're right. But either way, just looking at it on paper, it's just nice for Terence Crawford to have taken care of a guy in 4 rounds who Errol Spence really struggled with. Yeah, that fight went, 10 or 11 rounds? And it was highly competitive. And even though Errol Spence did come through and he won well, it was a tough fight for him. That was probably the toughest fight, other than maybe Sean Porter. That was the toughest fight of Errol Spence's career. Real tough for him. So anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments about this particular fight. Were you surprised at how quickly Terence Crawford was able to get rid of Kell Brook? Or did you expect this kind of thing? And now we move forward to the, actually, one thing I do want to mention is the contractual situation between Terence Crawford and Top Rank, because there's been rumors, and Terence Crawford hasn't confirmed or denied, but there's been rumors that this Crawford-Brook fight was going to be the last under Top Rank for Terence Crawford. And we'll see what happens. Perhaps he'll step, cross the street, as they like to say, and join PBC so he can get some big fights. But we move on now to Errol Spence versus Danny Garcia. that is a fascinating fight because as much as people say Kell Brook is not the same since the Golovkin and Errol Spence fights, we need to find out whether Errol Spence is the same after that car wreck. Is he still the same? Danny Garcia will surely find out. This is what's so fascinating about this one. If that car wreck, that car crash hadn't have happened, I'd still be interested in Errol Spence versus Danny Garcia, but I'd be much more confident in an Errol Spence win. But you just don't know what kind of effects that crash had on his body, on the nerves in his body, on the muscles, on his movement, you know, because it was a terrible crash. And I know he's young enough and he's extremely physically fit, and that helps recovery a far greater rate and to a far greater extent than it would with a normal person. But still, it's going to be fascinating to see what type of Errol Spence we have after that crash against Danny Garcia. And Danny Garcia is a guy who, yeah, he's taken his losses over the years. Nobody's ever blown him out. And Danny Garcia always stays in shape. When have you ever seen Danny Garcia out of shape? We've seen Errol Spence out of shape. We've seen Kell Brook out of shape. We've never seen Danny Garcia out of shape, or at least I haven't. He's always in shape. And he hasn't had a terrible car crash where he's lucky to have not died. So anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below about the Crawford-Brook fight and where Terence Crawford goes from here, his situation with Top Rank, and what you think about the potential of an Errol Spence showdown down the line, or maybe a Danny Garcia showdown. We'll see. Let me know, people. If you'd like to access all my boxing content advert-free and enjoy the convenience of listening via a podcast app with the option to download in high-quality MP3, then consider joining me on Patreon. In addition to the aforementioned perks, you'll also gain access to exclusive weekly live stream Q&A sessions and hangouts, as well as uncensored, no-holds-barred uploads, which are too blue for YouTube. This includes my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Boxing Extra. There's no contract, there's no commitment, it's only £2.50 a month, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of hardcore boxing enthusiasts by signing up with me here on Patreon today.